Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. We are truly honored to have with us Professor David R Syiemlieh, a distinguished academician and an administrator with an illustrious career. Professor David Syiemlieh has served as the chairman of Union Public Service Commission UPSC and Vice Chancellor of Rajiv Gandhi University, Itanagar. His contribution to education and public service has been widely recognized. For his literary work, he has been recently conferred the prestigious Padmashree Award by the Government of India. He is also the member of Board of Management in Assam Don Bosco University since the year 2020. Let us take this opportunity to hear from Professor Syiemlieh. It's a privilege to have you with us, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lima.
Thank you. To begin with today's podcast, let us start with your academics and your research journey. You have extensively researched on different topics on Northeast India, the historical perspective of Northeast India. Your body of research has significantly provided us a immense understanding about the Northeast India. Professor, my first question is, what drew your attention? What drew you to first study the colonial history of Northeast India?
I've always wanted to be a teacher and a scholar and a research scholar. I do remember in school, in my class 11 in Kalimpong, Dr. Graham's homes, my classmates would call me professor. Mm-hmm. So I lived up to that expectation many years later when I became a professor at NEHU. Mm-hmm. But the journey was long, from a teaching assignment in St. Edmund's College between 1977 and 1979, after which I went to NEHU as a lecturer, as a young lecturer. And it was at that time that we were required to finish our PhD. Prior to the PhD, I did an MPhil. Mm-hmm. on the constitutional developments in the Khasi and the Jaintia Hills. Mm-hmm. And I was stimulated to continue it with my PhD, which took me a good 3 years. Mm-hmm. I must say that I didn't take leave during the tenure of my research in NEHU. I would teach between 9:30 and 11, close my door and work on till 5 o'clock every day. And in the winter time, I would do my research and the data collection. And in 1985, I got my PhD from the Northeastern Hill University on the topic British administration in the Khasi and the Jaintia Hills, a history that goes back from 1772 or 1765, a little earlier, down to 1950. So it's a long history that I covered.
That's really great, and seems like you were a very sincere and brilliant student, sir. Coming to this, my next question from your this answer, would you like to share very briefly about your mentors in your academic journey?
I was very fortunate to have wonderful mentors. The most spectacular mentor of mine was Professor J.B. Bhattacharjee, who is the most renowned of historians in the region. He covers ancient, medieval, modern, and contemporary, whereas many of us have limited our research to modern Indian history or ancient or medieval Indian history. J.B. Bhattacharjee also was the founder, president, and the man behind the Northeast India History Association. So his love for history is immense, and he has left an immense impact on the teaching of history, the research in history, and the publication of history. So this is Professor J.B. Bhattacharjee, the first mentor. Mm-hmm. My mentor on my research on Christianity in Northeast India comes from Professor Milton Sangma. I was in Tura a few months ago and I visited Professor Sangma. He's the same gentleman that I remember in our NEHU connection. Very jovial, very interesting to talk to, and even at the age of 90 odd, he has a very sharp memory. Mm-hmm. So these were two of the historians who made an impact on me. A very important person in my mentorship was Professor Imdad Hussain. Imdad Hussain is another thorough gentleman, and he and I would discuss many of the topics, and particularly one of the books that I've written, On the Edge of Empire. And we shared material. One of the good things working in NEHU was that we did not keep the material we had collected to ourselves. We would share the material. And it was a wonderful experience getting material from J.B. Bhattacharjee and Milton Sangma and Imdad Hussain, as much as they also appreciated the material that I shared with them from my research in different archives in India and abroad.
Okay, great. Professor David, coming up to, you mentioned about your book, Edge of Empire, that delves into the four critical pillars of British colonial this thing from 1941 to 47. During your research, what was the most surprising and most overlooked documents while preparing these documents? What were the most surprising and overlooked facts that you have come across during your research?
These four plans of Robert Reed, Mills, Clough, and Adams has highlighted a very secret plan of the British to retain Northeast India, whereas while giving India independence, to retain Northeast India like a crown colony or a protectorate. And the information that I collected from their secret documents, which were all published just before the independence of India, only but briefly talks about the plan. There's a lot on the cultural element, the economic and the political connections of the people of Northeast India, which is overlooked. And my intention to have the original texts reprinted through a publication by Sage Publications was not only to focus on the plans per se, but also on the details that they provided. Anthropologists, folklorists would be able to use this book to the extent that a politician or a political science student or a history student would be able to use.
Great. Professor, this brings me to another question. That is, you served as the chairman of UPSC, and what will be your message to the young UPSC aspirants while opting for the subject history? Because it is observed that during 1970s and 80s, there were students who would opted for this subject during their examinations, but there is a decline in this subject while taking or preparing for the civil service examinations. What are your insights on this one?
I don't know how you have come to this conclusion that history is not any longer preferred subject, because the UPSC does not give statistics of the students who do the subjects. But there's a general trend these days for history continuing as a subject in the civil services examination. But more than history, there's a preference these days for political science and sociology and geography and certain of the other humanities subjects. We have to find out why history has lost its touch as a subject in the civil services. Perhaps because the syllabus is too vast.
Okay.
Perhaps because it's not being taught sufficiently well in the universities and colleges to attract students to do history as a subject in the civil services. But history has its significance and its impact, and we could talk about this a little later.
Okay. So, so one more question: what would be your message to the young historians or the researchers who would like to take history as not only as a subject to pass in the exams, but as a lens to understand more about governance, policy, and society?
History talks about the past, and what we historians tend to do, are obliged to do, is to make history relevant and in the present. We don't talk about the future. But it is the connection between the past, making it relevant today, which makes it significant in the future too. And history has been studied in universities across the world, and it is a subject that draws attention in many, many levels. Earlier, the histories that were written were focused on the political connection, the creation of empires and such. But now history has moved away into oral tradition, folklore, social history, economic history. You can have any types of history, history of institutions, history of people, memoirs, and therefore history continues to be a subject which draws attention of scholars around the world. And I'm happy that Don Bosco University has a history department. I only wish that the research in the university will stimulate more creativity and research on the history of the region and the history of the tribal communities in Northeast India.
All right, Professor. Another aspect I would like to know from you is that in today's rapidly evolving world where it is dominated by artificial intelligence, technology, STEM disciplines, what is your view on the fact that the value of history contributing to this interdisciplinary? You have already mentioned about the different aspects of studying history. My question is that is history at risk because it seems sometimes that it has been sidelined from the education system, or is there any renewed relevance that is to be recognized?
History talks about facts, and a good historian always will use facts from archives and of literature, which could be official, which could be memoirs, which could be private, which could be institutions. And history will always remain as a preferred subject for studies in universities and colleges because it gives tremendous scope for the creativity of writing history. Look at Indian history. Why are there so many interpretations? Because history does not close itself up to interpretation of the past. And therefore it allows shades and different colors in the interpretation of the past. Some go very, very wrong. Some are very traditional. Some are obsolete. Some continue. But what about history? What makes history interesting is history evolves. And you can have new interpretations when new sources emerge. For instance, I can give an example. Why is there today a rewriting of the history of freedom fighters in Northeast India? Because there's the opening of archives in Calcutta and Delhi and London, and scholars going to these archives and bringing back material, and there's a reinterpretation of the past. So the reinterpretation of the past allows scholars to work on topics which others have done, but give a different touch to it, relating to the material that they have uncovered.
From your this response, I would like to ask you, would you like to share your research on Tirath Singh, the Khasi freedom fighter?
There's a very interesting connection between Tirath Singh and the Syiemliehs, because Tirath Singh was a Syiemlieh from the Syiemlieh clan. And the significance of Tirath Singh is that between 1829 and 1833, he and his confederates fought against the British colonialists. And that was about it, because the history texts just mentioned about him being captured, and there was no reference to his last days. Several years ago, while on a research visit to London, I was able to look into the archival notes in the India Office Library and records in London. And there I discovered the death certificate of Tirath Singh.
Oh, that's really great.
And he passed away on 17th July 1835. And I brought back the material from London. This was later followed with other material which I got from National Archives in Delhi and Calcutta relating to the last days of Tirath Singh. So I was able to reconstruct the last days of Tirath Singh and to show that Uttarat Singh did not die in prison. The belief is that he died in prison, but he did not die in prison. The British respected his position as a native ruler, as a chief of an Indian state, and provided him an allowance, a house, well-guarded house. He moved around Dhaka in a palanquin, and the reason for his death is not indicated, just that he died on 17th July at 1 p.m. And there's been a tremendous response back in the hills of Meghalaya, and the government of Meghalaya, in recognition of the work that I did, has declared 17 July to be a state holiday.
That's incredible.
Thank you very much.
Professor, it seems like you have traveled nationally, internationally, and you have to plan so much in it immensely for your research. Would you like to share some, throw some light how you have collected the materials, how your plannings were made, and where all the plannings were successful, or like how did you go with that?
When I was researching on my book, British Administration in Meghalaya, I made some requisitions in the National Archives in Delhi, only to be given a notice from the archivist that the material that I needed after 1917 was not for study by research scholars. There was a restriction. And since my research had to continue from 1917 till 1947 and into the creation of Meghalaya, I had only one other recourse, was to get permission to go to London, the India Office Library and Records, and I was able to complete my doctoral dissertation, the data collection from that archive. And the archive, if the London archive could give me the material, then I don't know why the government of India is so restrictive to not allow. But I believe these days that restriction has been removed, so young scholars can look into records into more recent times.
Okay. Professor, I believe you have made an significant research on Portuguese connection in the Northeast India.
Pardon me?
You have done research in Portuguese connection.
Portuguese, yes, Portuguese.
Portuguese connection with the Northeast India. Would you like to share some light on your research on that?
Yes, many years ago, I moved on to a history of the Holy Cross congregation, which had come to East Bengal and Bangladesh and into Northeast India in the early part of the last century. While researching on the Holy Cross, I was able to look up archives in the National Library and also from the records in Rome, and the records of the Holy Cross in Rome, and also in various repositories in the UK and in London. And I found, to my surprise, that the indication of a large community of Portuguese had been neglected in the history texts of Northeast India.
Okay.
There was an American historian, Frederick Downs, who had first made mention of them. And I took the lead from Frederick Downs's research on the Portuguese, and I have published extensively on the Portuguese connection. They were in Rangamati, which was the northeasternmost frontier of the Mughal Empire. And at one point of time, there were 7,000 Portuguese soldiers there as mercenaries. They were also used by the Mariamnagar. They were in Mariamnagar, and they protected the Tripura state from any incursions from Chittagong. And at the same time, they had one more settlement in Badarpur, which is close to Silchar. So I have talked about how these communities started and grew, and they collapse. Remnants of these communities are still to be found in Mariamnagar and Badarpur. And I wish, and I would urge some scholar from Assam Don Bosco University who is interested in the history that I have just narrated to do a study on this.
Professor David, we have seen that many young people are rediscovering their roots and cultural identity. One of your book on layers of history, essays on the Khasi and the Jaintiyas, how this book can serve as a resourceful thing for the young people now.
Let me tell you how I got to writing this book. In my academic career, I've written around 150 articles published in peer reviews.
Okay.
And while I was in the UPSC, I would have an opportunity to go to the archives and the libraries and continued my research. And I found that it was necessary to put together a couple of my articles in a book form. And every Saturday and Sunday, while in my residence in Delhi, I would have the time to put together these articles and with necessary permissions from whoever had the copyright. There are 17 essays which I've put together relating to personalities of history such as Tirot Singh, such as David Scott and other personalities who have made an impact on the Khasis and the Jaintiyas. I've talked about the economic history, I've talked about the past going into more recent times, and it has been received fairly well, and it has gone into a second edition. But the impact of the book is appreciated by scholars as also practitioners of history because it has provided a reinterpretation and, other than a reinterpretation, detailed history, for instance, on the economic history. I have 2 chapters there on the economic history of the Khasi Jaintiyas, talking about the trade routes, talking about the markets, mentioning the produce of the Khasis and the Jaintiyas. Interestingly, the Khasis excavated iron ore and smelted iron and had a trade in iron going back many, many years. And today there's an interest in relocating the foundries and the kilns and the other infrastructure necessary for the making of iron in the Khasi Hills. So it has been received extremely well, and I'm happy that it will continue to draw attention to scholars and practitioners of history.
Great, great, Professor. Professor David, connecting the Khasi, one question came to my mind. Your alma mater is Northeastern Hill University. Would you like to share any memories from there?
Well, very interestingly, yesterday I was at the Northeastern Hill University and I walked through the corridors of history department and I was very touched with the connection that I have with Nehru. My connection with Nehru goes back to 1974 when I was a student of history, not so much in the main campus, which is presently located in the outskirts of Shillong, but at Mayurbhanj, Nongthamai, where I did my master's in between 74 and 76, only to return in 79 as a lecturer in history, worked myself up as a reader and then a professor. And I've talked about those who have made an impact on my life through the research and the mentorship that they gave me. But I also did play my own role with the work of mentoring scholars who worked on the MPhil and the PhDs with me. And it was a most enduring experience that I had. I am ever grateful to the research scholars who gave me the opportunity to guide them in their research. And I've had students from Tripura, Nagaland, Manipur, Meghalaya, and Assam, covering a wide range of histories, largely modern, because that is my area of specialization. My connection with Nehru also is interesting in the sense that I took leave from teaching to then become control of examination, dean of student welfare. I was also at a point of time registrar of the university. And finally, before I went to Rajiv Gandhi University, I was pro-vice chancellor of the university. So these functions, administrative functions that I had at Nehru, were important for me to use while I was in Rajiv Gandhi University as Vice Chancellor, and then later on in the UPSC. So my connection with Nehru is very, very endearing and long, and continuing too.
Interesting. Professor David, seems like your all the administrative roles in NEHU or Rajiv Gandhi University has steered you or directed towards, or did it help you in your experience in UPSC as a chairman? Would you like to share some experience?
Well, before becoming chairman of the UPSC, I was a honorable member in the UPSC for a good 4.5 years. And then I was chairman in between 2017 and 2018. And then I demitted office in January 2018. Again, my experience in the UPSC was rather long, a long tenure I had there. And being a professor of history, I was involved in the revision of the syllabus, looking in charge of the examinations and having my inputs, giving my academic interest. But other than that, one other contribution that I have made, and it is quite well appreciated, is the start of a museum in the UPSC.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, and I worked extremely hard in putting together the artifacts and the write-up for this. So if you ever go to Delhi and you tell your students that if they wish to have an experience of the UPSC and the impact that it makes on the lives of many, then tell your students, and perhaps it'll be interesting for you to go to the UPSC and see the museum that.
Yeah, sure, Professor. We'll definitely take up this advice and would take students. Professor David, that brings me to one of the question like your future plans. You have extensively worked on topics like history, cultural topics, and all. Are you working on any other historical themes or topics or exploring anything new? What's your next plan?
Provided I have the sense and the good health, I have 2 more projects to finish. One is a lecture that I gave in DFU 2 years ago, and I'm at this stage of editing the text and the manuscript. It's a history of 2 Catholic congregations that have completed 100 years of their mission in Northeast India. One is the Holy Cross, of which I've made mention, and the other is the Salesian community. Both these 2 communities have completed 100 years of their mission in Northeast India.
Okay.
And I've written quite extensively on both the congregations. And what I felt was perhaps a digest of their material would be useful, which I gave as an endowment lecture in DFU at the Northeast India History Association.
Okay.
And that will be published in a matter of 2 or 3 months' time. Other than this, I have several essays on Christianity in Northeast India, which I've written in various journals and proceedings volumes. And I intend, given the opportunity and the facilities to work, I will be able to put together another collection like I did for Layers of History. And it won't take too long because my material is all on the computer. It would just require further editing and corrections of certain errors that might have crept in while writing the original text. It will not involve any archival study because the footnotes are very elaborate. I write extensive footnoting. In fact, if you see On the Edge of Empire, the first chapter, which is my editorial note, in the 40 pages that cover that editorial note, I have 100 and odd footnotes and references.
That's a unique style.
That's a unique, it's very, very detailed. We historians, if we
Yeah.
are credited with anything, is the footnoting that we do.
Yeah.
And I'm very fastidious about the footnotes that I provide in my literature.
Yeah. That's really great. Thank you so much, Professor David. This brings us to the end of today's conversation. It was really very enriching and interesting to have this conversation. And I hope this conversation has brought valuable perspective to our listeners. With this, we wrap up today's session. We hope you have had great insights from this conversation. Stay tuned for more meaningful interactions and sessions from Assam Don Bosco University. Thank you so much.